breakers walking not 200 meters from here. Okay. Thank goodness we have the best private protection services in the world. We pay for it. Okay. Because we don't have a police force. We literally don't have a police. Our police minister is about to get indicted for fraud. Our police minister. Okay. So, and he's part of a syndicate that imports, you can call it anything. Okay. So, yeah. But, anyways, I just want to say something about this whole thing about the tithe and people getting into conferences like this. I saw it because it happened to me. When I had the bookshop initially, there were other people because they were family, etc., etc. They were allowed into these big halls and things at camp meetings where everybody comes and they have stuff, Bibles, and they sell whatever. So I had a small ministry then, and we started with books and DVDs, small. Okay. The second year we went to a big camp meeting, I now had imported the Remnant Bible from Remnant Publications. I had Review and Herald books. I had imported R500,000 worth of books and Bibles. And so I can show you photographs. It was the most beautiful thing we put together. We had bought shelving. It cost us, well, it cost me close to 750,000 Rand at that stage. Okay. So you know how much invested in the church I was because everything came from us, from myself and Diane. We put everything in. And we put up this beautiful place, whatever. You know, the very first thing that I had to do before I could open the doors is I had to write out a check for 30,000 Rand. To whom? The organizers of the camp meeting. They took 30,000, which is, uh, it's about, in today's terms, about 6,000 US dollars upfront from me before I sold one book, one Bible. They took it because to grant me the privilege to have the shop there. And I had to pay it 3 times because I went to 3 of their camp meetings. I had to pay it up front. So yeah, that's where the church is.
Today's reading is from Psalms 95. O come, let us sing unto the Lord. Let us make a joyful noise to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before his presence with thanksgiving and make a joyful noise unto him with psalms. For the Lord is a great God and a great King above all gods. In his hand are the deep places of the earth. The strength of the hills is his also. The sea is his, and he made it, and his hands formed the dry land. O come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker, for he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand. And he also tells us here to remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it.
Can you guys see my slide?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Hein. Thank you, Keith. It's about 11:30 today on July 12th. Coming to you from Bible Exploration, 11:30 Pacific time, the Sabbath day. Coming to you from Bible Explorations. This is really part two. It'll be actually part two of three, but it's part two of this series of the meaning and significance of the 153 fish spoken about in John chapter 21. So the end time prophetic significance of the bread and the fishes. And this time for our scripture reading last week, it was on the fishes. This is a few verses later. It says, Jesus then cometh and taketh bread and giveth them and fish likewise. So we're adding the bread to the fish. Last week we looked at why the Gospels include the exact number of the 153 large fish caught by the seven disciples after the resurrection of Jesus. Scholars have made many key observations about this specific number the past 2,000 years. But the risen Christ preserved the greatest revelation of his word for the end time generation in our observance of his covenant code as he instructed us in his final book of Revelation. This week in part two, we observe the bread and the fish, and in so doing, we begin to understand the significance of the feeding miracles to this, the last generation. So we're going to just review a little bit here. So what do we mean by the book of Revelation and our calling? So we looked at the parallel between the calling of Ezekiel, and that calling says, "But thou, son of man, hear what I have to say, and be not thou rebellious like the rebellious house. Open thy mouth and eat what I give thee." And basically, we've gone through this several times. So Ezekiel's given a scroll written inside and out. He's supposed to completely digest it and consume it before he then is called to speak in prophecy to the generation that he's called. In the book of Revelation of the risen Christ, you have the same thing in Revelations 10 and Revelation 11, where John is who represents the witness to this revelation of Christ, is told the same thing, to eat it up, to eat this open book in the hand of the angel, and to fully consume it before going into prophecy again, before many peoples, nations, tongues, and kings. So it's the last call of the last generation. And so we're instructed to do the same as what Ezekiel was instructed to do. In fact, we looked last week, we looked previously that the book of Ezekiel and the book of Revelation are really parallel books. And we always have to keep in mind that Ezekiel was called Son of Man, and that was one of the preferred two terms that Jesus used of himself, the Son of Man. So when we look at where does this eating of the book and the parallel between Ezekiel and Revelation, we see it right here where it begins, Revelation 10:1-7, with no more delay. This is the end time, no more delay. That's spoken of in Ezekiel 12. Then the eating of the book, Revelation 10, verses 8-11. That's actually how Ezekiel's book starts, chapter 2. But the measuring of the temple, which is found in Revelation 11:1-2, is how Ezekiel's book comes to an end, chapters 40 and 43. This particular verse that we're looking at about the fish and things like that is truly about Ezekiel 47 and Revelation 22, which is the river of life. So that's why we're looking at these, parallel Ezekiel 47, Revelation 22. It's near the end of the books, and it's really based on the river of life. And that's what we speak about fishes and et cetera, et cetera. So as we looked at last week in Ezekiel 47, the source of this river is the right side of the altar. So it occurs from the tabernacle, from the temple, on the right side of the altar, just as where Mary and the mother of Jesus and Mary, her cousin, and Mary Magdalene stood along with John at the south side of the altar when Jesus was being crucified. But that's where the source of this river starts, the right side of the altar. And in prophecy in Ezekiel 47, it says, Fishes shall stand upon it from Engedi even unto Eneglaim to spread forth the nets. And we saw last week that when you take the word en, it really means fountain or stream. So it's the stream of Gedi and the stream of Eglaim. And we mentioned that today there's still is the spring of Engedi is known. We can go there today, but the spring of Eglaim is unknown. And we also looked at how this 17 and 53, 153, started to become noticed by scholars and church fathers and stuff over the last 2,000 years, because the Hebrew value for Gedi is 17 and for Elam is 153. And it says that, just speaking about the river of life in this vision in Ezekiel 47, says that these fishermen were standing and capturing fish according to their kinds, as the fish of the great sea, exceedingly many. Also have to mention that this water was for healing, the healing of the nations. So we observed last week that the early church fathers observed that there was 153 nations at that time, at the time of Jesus. And it hasn't changed much today. There's 195 nations today. But the Revelation 17:15 said, Then the angel said to me, the waters you saw where the prostitute was seated are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. So we realize that these waters represent people, nations, tongues, languages. So this is where the fish are pulled from, and this is where the fishermen, cast their nets. We then looked at what makes this 17 and 153 a particularly interesting number. So we have the 17 from Gedi and the 153 from Eglaim. But when you add up all the numbers from 1 to 7, it's called a triangular number, because if you add up all the numbers from 1 to 17, so here we have 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, and you keep going up to 17, you get 153. So in other words, when you start up here, 1, and then you get to the second day, 2, and 1 and 2 there's 2, but there's 3 balls. And on each side of the triangle, it's 2, 2, 2. You get here to the third day, and it's 1 plus 2 plus 3. So now you have, the third day, but you have 3, 4, 5, 6 balls in there. So you just keep going to each tier. And by the time you get to the 17th tier, there's 17 balls on this side, 17 on this side, 17 on this side. But in total, there's 153. So all it really means is adding all the numbers from 1 to 17, you get 153 total. 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, all the way to 17 equals 153. It's a very interesting number. It's a triangular number, and that's why it has all kinds of scholarly theories about it. But I want to add something this week now, because the concept of a nation back in the first century wasn't so much about borders as it was by culture expressed by language. So in other words, the Jewish people, the Hebrew people, it wasn't necessarily that their borders were just inside of Jerusalem or Israel or Judah. It was where the people were, where their tongue, their nationality. And so it's mentioned here on the day of Pentecost. This is Acts chapter 2. It says, and there were dwelling at Jerusalem Jews, notice it says devout men out of every nation under heaven. So these were people that had come specifically to observe the Passover and unleavened bread. And they were devout worshipers. They'd come to Jerusalem for this purpose. It says out of every nation of heaven. And it mentions where they came from. It said they're all amazed because they heard from the sound of the speaking of, in their language on the day of Pentecost. And they're amazed by it. They're drawn to it. They marveled. They said to one another, "Behold, are not all these which speak Galileans?" I remember when Peter was there trying to kind of disguise himself, but when his speech gave him away, says, "Are you not a Galilean?" So anyway, so these are all the disciples that were speaking were Galileans. So there's one. And now, and how we hear we every man in our own tongue, wherein they were born, Parthians and Medes and Elamites, and the dwellers in Mesopotamia and Judea and Cappadocia, Pontus, Asia, Phrygia, Pamphylia, Egypt, parts of Libya, Cyrene, strangers of Rome. Of course, in Rome they spoke Greek. Jews and proselytes, Greeks and Arabians. We do hear them speak in our own tongues the wonderful works of God. So if you add these up from Galileans and you go through everything we mentioned here, there's 17 languages mentioned here. So yes, there was 153 nations at that time, but there's 17 languages that dominate those places where all these had come from. So in speaking to the 3,000 that day, they were going out, those 3,000 were going out back to those 17 parts of the world and begin to prepare their way for the Lord and begin to evangelize back then. So this day of Pentecost was a miraculous thing, but I wanted to kind of give some reality to that, and that if you Google how many languages are today, you'll get some crazy numbers like 7,000 or whatever. But here's the 12 dominant languages today. Beginning number 1, English, number 2, Mandarin, number 3, French, etc. You go all the way down, 4, Spanish, Arabic, Hindi, all the way down to German. So these 12 represent 5.5 billion people. So it's not how many languages there are, but what are the dominant languages? What are the languages that define the culture and the language? So there was 17 dominant languages represented here of the 153 nations. So I'm going to add that because speaking and preaching the gospel is all part of this whole understanding. We spoke last week about this, what's called the measure of the fish. It's the Vesica Pacisis, measure of the fish. The number of 153 is related to this. It's when you take two circles with equal radiuses and you merge them together to their centers, you have this approximation that's equal to where the base of it is 153 out of 265. So the base is, and that number, because they didn't have digits back then, there was fractions, that number is the closest way to approximate the value of pi, which is linked to that. So in the middle of this little area where you can calculate all the rest of the circle approximates pi. And why is pi? Pi is crucial for describing many natural phenomena. So things that you observe in the world, you can't mathematically represent it without using pi. So it includes wave motion. How do you describe sound and light? The orbits of the planets, even the behavior of subatomic particles, all are related to that one number. And so, this mathematical properties it's a triangular number, it's a hexagonal number, and it's a truncated triangle number. We mentioned last week too that when we take these two equal circles, merge together, and what do they have in common? That common area, which is the measure of the fish. We mentioned that Peter and Paul are the only two people named in the Bible exactly 153 verses each, and they were the two that went out to basically. Peter was the evangelist of the Jews, and Paul was the evangelist of the Gentiles. in Matthew 18:20 says, "For where two or three gather together in my name, there am I with them, or there am I in the midst." And of course, we see through archaeology, this is sometimes called the Jesus fish, but this symbol all throughout Jerusalem and all throughout the small towns and synagogues, etc. So this measure of the fish was well understood to be uh, a very, very important number. But in reality, it is the common area between these two circles. We spoke last week about the miraculous feeding of the bread and the fish, and how Jesus pointed out how important this was for us to understand. When Jesus came and spoke in John 21, 7:14, the first thing he said to the disciples who were out in the boat, not having any success, is, "Children, have you any meat?" And of course, meat, the old term meat is food, can be, bread, meat, etc. Jesus then cometh and taketh, and at the end, it says, Jesus cometh and taketh bread and give them, and fish likewise, which is our quotation for this week. So it's talking about the bread and the fish. In Mark 8:1 or 8:19 to 21, Jesus made sure that the disciples understood it, or made sure they began to understand. He said because they were worried, because Jesus said to them, "Beware of the bread of the Pharisees, or the leaven of the Pharisees." And they thought, well, it's because we forgot to bring provisions. And Jesus said to them, "When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many basketfuls of broken pieces did you collect?" So pieces of bread and of fish. And they said 12. "And when I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many basketfuls of broken pieces did you collect?" They said 7. Then he asked them, "Do you still not understand?" And they were a little bit dumbfounded. But we spoke last week of what we're to understand. There was 2 feedings. The 5,000 were to the Jews. It was on one side with the Sea of Galilee, and the other feeding was for the Gentiles on the other side of the lake. So the 5,000, there was 5 loaves, and because the prophecy was going all the way back to Elisha, that they will be bread from a few fish and bread, that there would be uh, more than enough, provision. There'd be some gathered up. So with the 5,000 Jews, there was 5 loaves, and there's 12 small baskets of fragments. And it even mentioned barley. This represents the early rain, the 12 tribes of Israel, beginning of the ministry. 5 loaves and 12 baskets equals 17. But the other feeding of the 4,000 was the Gentiles, and there were 7 loaves and 7 large baskets, which represents the wheat or the latter rain, 7 loaves and 7 baskets. And it was the 7 fishermen that were out on the boat in John 21 that Jesus spoke to, and who were blessed with a net full of 153 fish. So it's 2 different feedings, and it represents the ministry to the Jews and the Gentiles. And remember that at the beginning of this ministry, he did the same thing with Peter and with the fishermen, where he told them where to cast their net, and they had so much that their nets broke, and they realized, and Peter said, "I'm get away from me. I'm not worthy. I'm not righteous." But at the end of that event, they left all they had and they began to follow Jesus. So these are kind of 2 bookend events where at the end of his ministry, after his resurrection, he goes to visit them again and says, "Have you any fish?" So Deuteronomy 7:1 says, "When the Lord your God brings you into land that you are entering to possess, and he drives up before you many nations," and there's 7 nations mentioned: the Hittites, Girgashites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, 7 nations larger and stronger than you. So in order to have to have God's promise fulfilled and then enter into the promised land, there is people that were in the way of his promise. And these are these 7 nations that he had to drive out. In Acts 13, 18 and 19, it says, he speaks about the Israelites. He endured their conduct for about 40 years in the wilderness. And having vanquished 7 nations in Canaan, he gave their land to his people as inheritance. This is Paul speaking. So it was well known that there were 7 nations that were cast out, and those nations, the exact place where they fed the 4,000, was known to be the center for those 7 nations. So it's all about the ministry to the Jews and the Gentiles. And it also is the same thing according to the law and the prophets, and the exact same thing they did when the disciples were out preaching the ministry, and they were having complaints from the Greeks, from some of the Gentiles, that their widows weren't getting the provisions that they needed and weren't getting the attention. So the apostles appointed 7 deacons. So that there's 12 apostles, there's 7 deacons, and those 7 deacons included Stephen and 6 other Greeks. And it was when Stephen was preaching, this was 3.5 years after the resurrection of Jesus, so it fulfills the prophecy of Daniel of the 69 weeks and 3.5 years for the ministry of Jesus, and 3.5 years later is the end of that week, and that's when Stephen was preaching, and he went through the whole history of the Jews. But it gets to the last part here, when the members of the Sanhedrin heard this, so they're gathered around listening to him speak, they were furious and gnashed their teeth at him. But Stephen, full of the Holy Spirit, looked up to heaven and saw the glory of God, and Jesus standing at the right hand of God. Look, he said, I see heaven open, and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God. At this, they covered their ears, and yelling at the top of their voices, they all rushed at him, dragged him out of the city, and began to stone him. Meanwhile, the witnesses laid their coats at the feet of a young man named Saul. While they were stoning him, Stephen prayed, Lord Jesus, receive my spirit. Then he fell on his knees and cried out, Lord, do not hold this sin against them. When he had said this, he fell asleep. So, repeated, Jesus' ministry began 483 years after the Gentile decree, 3.5 years of ministry, 3.5 years to the stoning. And the Jewish believers then began to scatter. Right after that stoning of Stephen, they were so concerned about this Saul, and about this persecution of the disciples and this violence, that right then many of them fled to nations all over the world, Gentile nations. And Saul, on the road to Damascus in pursuit of them, he was the last called by Jesus, the apostle called at a time. And it's actually, and Jesus said he'll suffer many things because of all that he had done, but he'll suffer them in my name. But he became the one that wrote over half the gospel, and he became the apostle for the Gentiles. So that large, that large harvest of the Gentiles came through Paul. So there's all these significant things that are occurring during this time. But the 17th of Nisan is a key date in all biblical redemption and salvation history. So, for example, Noah's Ark comes through the waters and rests on the earth on the 17th day. Let me just move this. I'm just going to move something here so I can see. The 17th day of Nisan. And people say, no. It wasn't, it was the second month that, the 17th day of the second month that the ark was closed in 150 days. So it was a day 197 that it says that the ark rested on the Mount of Ararat. But you have to remember that during the Exodus, which came later, the 7th month was changed to the 1st month. So the ark actually came to rest on the 17th day of the 1st month. After it was this exact same day that the ark came to rest in the Lord's, and we'll talk more about this next week. But the seventh month was changed to the first month at the Exodus. So, and during the Exodus, when that was changed, on the 17th day was the firstborn consecrated to the Lord, and the observance of first fruits and all those initial feasts were based on this. We're going to read a little bit more about the firstborn being consecrated in a minute. But they also crossed the Red Sea on dry land the last day of unleavened bread. So the first day of unleavened bread, there's a consecration of the firstborn. Then you had first fruits that they're supposed to observe once they got into the land. That was 2 days later after the consecration. Then there's supposed to be 7 days, and then another holy convocation. And it was actually that day, the last day of unleavened bread, was the same day that they crossed on dry land through the Red Sea and entered into the wilderness. Joshua, this is 40 years later, he crossed the Jordan. So this is the parting of the Red Sea. But Joshua crossed the Jordan and led the people to the promised land, and the manna stopped from the 17th onwards. So on the exact day, on the 16th day of the first month, 40 years later, is when they entered into the promised land. And the 17th day, there was no manna. The bread from heaven stopped. And instead of the bread from heaven that they'd been having for 40 years, they had the actual fruit and grain from the promised land. And this is the day of Jesus' resurrection, the bread from heaven. And when the firstborn, of all creation, the firstborn, the Son of God, well, let me just first read you this. The other thing that happened on the 17th, the death sentence hung over the entire Israelite nation as the sworn enemy, Haman, had convinced the king to sign a decree to destroy them. This is in Esther 3, 1-12. The decree went out on the 13th of Nisan. This is Esther 3:12. Esther then proclaimed a 3-day fast for the 14th, 15th, and 16th. On the third day, Esther approached the king, saying to herself, "If I perish, I perish." On the 17th of Nisan, the tables were turned on the enemy Haman, and remember, he had built a gallows to hang Mordecai. And instead of the Jews being destroyed, his own life was taken. This was Haman. And Mordecai, who was at the gate on the 13th in Ashcloth when he heard about this decree, was honored, and he was given royal robes, a ring, etc. Prior to that, Haman had to lead him around on a royal horse. So this day that was planned for evil became, a day of salvation, of rescue. All these things are when they left the Exodus, it was because Pharaoh wouldn't let them go. And these days when the flood came, that 17th was the day of rest from when the mountain first rested in this judgment account. So this 17th day is a hugely important day for redemption and salvation and the turning of tides in the history of the world. And I'd say history of Israel, but when we're talking about the flood, there was no Israel and no Jew and no Gentile. That was all people. So in God's salvation plan, this always was and always will be a key day. So you have Passover the 14th, unleavened bread the 15th, first fruits 16th, and the last day of unleavened bread on the 21st. So this is talking about the consecration, and this was as they were leaving in the Exodus, and it was told to them, 7 days thou shalt eat unleavened bread, and the seventh day shall be a feast of the Lord. Unleavened bread shall be eaten 7 days, and there shall be no leavened bread be seen with thee, neither shall there be leaven seen with thee in all the quarters. Thou shalt eat apart unto the Lord all that opens, thou shalt set apart unto the Lord all that opens the matrix, or all that opens the womb. And the first thing that comes of a beast which thou hast, the male shall be the Lord's. And every first thing of an ass, and this is important, thou shalt redeem with a lamb. So it's the donkey was an unclean animal. You had to, known for its stubbornness, but you didn't redeem that with the firstborn of the donkey. You redeem that with a lamb. If thou will not redeem it, so if you refuse to do that with the redeem with the lamb, maybe the lamb is too precious to you, whatever, then thou shalt break its neck, break the firstborn of the donkey's neck, and all the firstborn of man among thy children shalt thou redeem. So, even was explained, and it shall be when the son asks thee in time to come, saying, what is this? That thou shalt say unto him, by strength of hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt, from the house of bondage. And here's the important part. And it came to pass when Pharaoh would hardly let us go, that the Lord slew all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, with the firstborn of man and the firstborn of beast. Therefore, I sacrifice to the Lord all that opens the matrix, being males. But all the firstborn of my children I redeem. So in other words, Pharaoh is given the same stubbornness as a donkey. And he refused to let the people go. And they said, we have a 3-day journey to go worship our God. He wouldn't let them go. And even when he did let them go, he changed his mind and went after them. And so, their firstborn, that's the last final curse, was killed. But as they left and were freed from Pharaoh and were redeemed, then the Lord said, your firstborn is mine. So the firstborn male animal, was to be sacrificed. So the firstborn male lamb would be sacrificed, but the firstborn son would be dedicated to the Lord, and he would be redeemed by a lamb. So all these things tie together with what was happening on resurrection morning about the redemption of the lamb and about the redeeming of the people. So, and this all happened during the Exodus. So the things that occurred during the ministry of Jesus and the resurrection and the things that follow all have to do with the exact earlier events, all the way back to Noah, all the way through time, through the Exodus. They're all based on events and that actually happened, and they're memorialized, and that's what became the holy days, the pattern given to Moses up on that mountain. Just memorialize those days, the Sabbath, the Passover, all of the things that he wrote in up the mountain, all from real events. So when we look at the appearances of Jesus after his resurrection, the 12 different appearances that Jesus made, we see that in the first one was to Mary Magdalene at the empty tomb, and then to Mary and the other Mary, then to Peter, then the two on the road to Damascus, and or road to Emmaus, I guess. So this is the fourth, but the interesting thing is the fifth. So these were all on the 16th day. Then to the 11, so when he appeared in the midst of the 11 was the evening of that 16th day. Well, as we know, the day was observed beginning at evening, then the morning, then the next day began the next evening. So the evening of the first day of the week, which is the 16th, when he appeared amongst them all, was the morning of the 17th. Or not the morning, it was the beginning of the 17th day. In other words, the 14th day began, Thursday night. It ended on Friday night, Friday evening. That would be the beginning of the 15th day. From Friday evening to Saturday evening would be the 15th day. Saturday evening would be the beginning of the 16th day, until morning. And then near the evening of the 16th day would be the beginning of the 17th day. So we have the 16th and 17th again, but where he appeared first to his disciples was at the beginning of the 17th day. And we have, the other visitations here and stuff as well. But we're looking again at the importance of the 17th. And if you look at all of the things that happened after that, they all correspond, and we did this study before, to events that Jesus appeared to the disciples until he ascended. And then, of course, right after that, 7 days later, was Pentecost. So the crossing of the Red Sea on dry land corresponds to the last day of unleavened bread. The same day, Jesus appeared among the 11, including Thomas. So that was, after that on the 17th, a week later, Thomas was there. That corresponds to the crossing of the Red Sea. When Moses made Israel set out from the Red Sea, they went into the wilderness of Shur. They went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. And when they came to Marah, they could not drink the water because it was bitter. Therefore, it was named Marah. And the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" And he cried to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a log. And he threw into the water the log, and the water became sweet. All this was leading up to the base of Sinai, which was right near Pentecost. And that's the time when Moses was told to strike the rock because they had no water at the base of Sinai. And the rock flowed, flowed water. And at that time, of course, that's when Moses went up the mountain, received the law, came down, and they heard the Lord speak. I put this picture in here just because this is the rock that actually sits at the base of what's believed to be Mount Sinai. And you can see the split, but you can also see erosion paths here of water. To show you the size of it, there's a man sitting there and another man standing there. And we'll do a study sometime. I'll show you all the different things on that mountain, all the features of where they sat down where they gathered, and the cave that's up there that Moses went into and that Elijah went into. It's fascinating. But anyway, so these things all lead really the from the from the Passover all the way to Pentecost and their journey to the mountain where they were told to go and where they received the law. The same things were happening during the time of the apostles because Christ fulfilled every single thing exactly according to the law and according to the prophets. So I want to move from there to what we talked briefly about. So remember that adding 1 to 17 equals this 153. But we're given only two other exact numbers like this between the Gospels and the book of Revelation. The second one we're giving is this Acts 27:37, when Paul is on his way back to Rome under captivity, and that the ship is gone afoul, it's about to be destroyed, and they all decided to be cast into the sea, and they got ashore alive. And for some reason, Paul records, in all there were 26 of us on board, 276 of us on board. Well, that number is the 23rd triangle number. So on here, 23 on this side, 23 on this side, 23 on this side. If you add all the numbers from 1 to 23, you get this 276. Then there's another number, Revelation 13:18, which says, "Here's wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of man, and his number is 600, threescore six, so 666. So when you get to the 36 number, which is 6 times 6, the 36 number, there's 36 on this side, 36 on this side, 36 on this side, and the total number in all this, from when you add 1 plus 2 plus 3 equals 666. So again, you have these three numbers that are given in the Bible in that order, and they're all things that were, really haven't been speculated on much. Most of this is the first numbers are speculated on, but they're all given to us to observe, all for a reason, especially in the end times, just to see these things. Jesus, so in the Bible, in the Gospels, 17 times the hour of Jesus appears in the Gospels. 15 times it says the hour has not come. 2 times the hour says the hour has come. The first time is in John 12:23. And this is when Jesus was entering Jerusalem on the 10th day, when they're coming in for preparation for Passover, the observation of Passover. And at that time, Jesus said, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. This statement is made in response to certain Greeks who wished to see Jesus, indicating that his glorification through death, resurrection is now imminent. So there's some Greeks that wanted to speak to him, and he said, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. John 17:1, that last prayer, that the prayer on the what it's called really the Last Supper, but really it's the Passover observation. On that day, Jesus prayed, said, Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, that the Son may glorify you. This verse is part of Jesus' high priestly prayer, where he prays for his glorification and the glorification of the Father through the sacrifice and resurrection. So I point all these things out to show you some things that we've already observed. I'm going to be showing you some things here that are going to prepare us for next week, but anyone that's followed along with us has all seen all these numbers before. And what these numbers represent, and we've taken, we've studied the tabernacle completely, and we've studied these time events as well, and we've seen that these events match entirely and specifically with the tabernacle pattern, and particularly with the Ark of the Covenant, where you have you have the Ark, and then you have the Ark times 1.5, which is its width. So from Adam to the Ark is 1656 years, times 1.5 is 2484 years, and that leads us right to the time of Jesus' ministry in 27 AD. And we looked at the length of the ark is 2.5. We take the same number from Adam to the ark times 2.5, and we get this 4,140 years right to Jesus. So it matches specifically 1.5 by 2.5. And we looked at all these other numbers in between here too. So the time from Adam to the seventh generation Enoch, 621 years. From Enoch to the flood, 1,035 years. From Adam all the way to Moses, 2,587.5 years, all very specific numbers. From Moses to Jesus, 155.25 years. Now I want to show this and consider what we've been talking about, the 16th and the 17th, and how and these numbers we've looked at, the 666, the 276, the 153, and I'm going to give it just the first taste of understanding here. So in a day, there's 24 hours. 0.666 of a day is 16 hours. Here, 16. And that's easy to figure out. 8 plus 8 plus 8 is 24. So 16 is 2/3 of that. or 0.666. 24 hours is 0.666 of a day. But 0.69 of a day is 16.56 hours. Remember, looking over here at 1656 years. So there's a difference between 666 and 0.69. So 16 times 1.035 equals 1656. What number do we see here? 1.035. Just as 666 times 1035 equals 69. So then 6 times 1.5525, awful specific number here, don't you think? Equals 24.84 hours. What's the time between the ark and the ministry of Jesus? 84 years. How many years from Moses to Jesus? 15525. 15525. Just as 16 times 2.5875, another very specific number here. Where do we get this number from? The time from Adam to Moses, 2,587.5 years. That time equals 4,140 hours, 41.4 hours. What's the total time between Adam and Jesus? 4,140 years. Remember, we talked about an hour is a day is 1,000 years. All these numbers we're seeing, we've looked at before, but I've never talked to you about the number 16 because we've never, now we're applying what we've seen from before. And we just talked about the 16th instead. And what is when you get to something over 16? So in other words, when 16 ends, remember the decimal system never came into use till about the 1700s. So they would use whole numbers, fractions, etc. So what is 16.56? What day is that? Well, anything over the 16th day is the 17th. So 16.5 would be halfway through the 17th day. The 17th day begins when the 16th ends. So 16.56 is halfway through that day. And you think about, when did the 16th day start? Well, it started, Saturday evening, and it ended on Sunday evening. So he was resurrected on the 17th day, but he wasn't resurrected at night. He was resurrected in the morning. And the first to see him, that the first light was Mary, which we saw that Mary came to the empty tomb. So what would be 16.56? Well, if it began in the evening, Saturday evening, 0.5 would be 6 in the morning. If, let's say, 6 o'clock at night was when it started, halfway through the 17th day would be the morning. And that's when all of his appearances began, first with the Mary and the other Marys, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a difference between the 16th day and this little bit of extra time. The 16th day, 16th time 1.03, so it's part of the 17th day. So we begin to understand that like 666 times 1.4 is 69. So all of these things that we've talked about, and we're just starting to apply now, all come from the tabernacle we look at. Just to prove it to you, this 16.56, what's the width of the ark we talked about? This 1.5, that equals 24.84 hours. 16.56, so this 0.69 of a day, 16 equals 41.4 hours. 1.5, 2.5. The difference when you're using 16 is 1.5525, 25875, which are all 1035 times 2.5, 1035 times 15. All this perfection. So these are the lives of people. Enoch, Noah, Moses, all the way to the ministry of Jesus. And all these numbers that fit in between. And we haven't even, we in further studies, we add other people to this as well. And, so you've already got, but there's the pattern is perfect. So not only did Jesus come in exact fulfillment of the Exodus pattern and the feasts that were given, the tabernacle pattern, and these times in history of redemption and of turning evil into good, and the prophecy from the very beginning when they captured when Satan deceived Adam and Eve and took away broke the covenant, and the Lord forgave them on the condition that they believe his word. And Adam believed and called his wife Eve the mother of the living. And so there's a prophecy given that the Lord would send the seed of the woman and he would crush the head of the serpent. And the seed was a capital S. And the seed, then that happened right here. So this is the fulfillment of everything from Adam all the way through. And it's this perfect puzzle that you could never, ever, ever come up with on your own. Because remember, when did Moses write the Bible and all his law? It was right here. How would he know not just what came before him, but that it would come exactly after him in this manner? Exactly, to fulfill it, he only wrote what he was told to write. He was told to make the pattern exactly 3 times. Make this pattern exactly as I've told you. Don't deviate a thing. And if he hadn't made that tabernacle and those laws and the holy days and everything exact, then he would never be able to observe this. And today, we're only observing this because we're observing the word of God in Revelation telling us to go back and measure the temple. We're not just reading it, we're doing it because the Lord put it in, and Daniel talked about it, that the end time, the book would be opened and many would come to knowledge, because this is the sort of thing that when we digest it and when we eat it, then we're given the provision to, when the Spirit, the last outpouring of the Holy Spirit comes, which I believe is in the next, very, very short time, we can minister this and proclaim this around the world. And people are now seeing things they've never saw before and hearing the truth. Hein was talking about young people being bored, and these people, no one's going to be bored when they hear things like this, the perfection. And it's just like with the fish and the supernatural miracle, people will see the supernatural word of God. This is, the supernatural thing that he's done to call these fishermen and prepare them, to go out and catch fish, which is the world, and especially the end time. So, did I skip there? No. So let me just say another thing about this. This is going to lead us into next week, but we talked about this 27.6. Well, 27.6 hours also is 1656. And we talked before how these are in observed solar years. That's by measurements of the sun and by our observations. But a prophetic year, so a solar year is 365.2 blah, blah, blah days long. A prophetic year is 360. And the way you can convert a solar to a prophetic is you divide it by 6.9 and then times it by 7. So it's actually 28 prophetic hours. 27.6 is 28. And 28 by 60 is 1680. And how many hours is in the week? There's 168. 24 times 7, 668. But in 28 hours, there is 1,680 minutes. Times 4, 1680 times 4 is, or 28 times 4 even is 112 hours, which is 4.66 days. Well, why do we care about that? That 28 times 4 equals 4.66. Because we've observed in the tabernacle that this entire covering over the tabernacle, this blue and this cherubim, is supposed to be made 28 by 4, which is, and then that's 112, which is 4.66 days. And then 10 of them are supposed to be strung together. So it's 46.66 days, same amount of the time is 46.66 days. Then we look at the sanctuary boards, all the boards inside of here that measure, the sanctuaries in, not the outside, but the inside boards. Because remember at the end, 6 boards times 1.5 is only 9, but 6.66 boards with a third of each of the corner boards inside here equals equals 10. And this whole thing equals 70 by these boards. So we've observed that there's that this 1120, this 1.12 is important. But also, if you take how many hours I got to move this. So in 24 hours times 60, there's 1,440 minutes. If you take 1,440 times 0.777, you're going to get 1120. So 0.777 of a day is 1120. 1120 times 1.5 is 1680, times 2 is 2800, times 3.75 is 4200. 4200 is the prophetic years, is 4140 prophetic years. But I'm not going to get too far off on that. We're looking at really the time from Adam to Jesus. Next week, we're going to look at its significance from Adam to our time, right to our generation, from Jesus to our generation. But I wanted to show you that without understanding the tabernacle, the law where it came from, all these days where it was observed from, all these things that Jesus gave us to observe, you'll never fully understand this 153, 276, 666. But it all has to do with Christ breaking the fish, breaking the bread, giving it to those he called to go and giving us the provision to go and in his calling to evangelize the world, to tell the gospel, tell the bread from heaven that stopped the day of his resurrection, because that he ascended, he came from heaven and he returned to heaven as the first fruits of of the dead, of the fulfillment of all prophecy, et cetera, et cetera. So we can tell this story, also with numbers. The river of life flowed from the right side of the altar. It is for the healing of the nations, and the fishermen are on each bank. Jesus caught the fishermen with his supernatural miracle. After his resurrection, he said, "Have you any meat or any bread and fish?" His hour had come, and he was glorified along with the Father, who sent him as the one promised in the law and the prophets, in which he came in exact fulfillment. He preserved his greatest revelation for the last generation, which can only be observed by observing his instructions in Revelation 10:11. Next week, we will complete the study by observing the tabernacle in relation to the last generation and the provisions and duties he has prepared for us in his last great calling. And I took an hour, but I'm half hour over because we started a half hour late. So that is my my presentation for this week. And I'll stop sharing now to see if there's any questions or comments that you would like to make.
Very good. All those numbers and they all fit. Always, always.
It was so awesome. I didn't think the numbers of the fish were arbitrary. I didn't think the numbers, after his resurrection of the fish they caught was arbitrary, but I couldn't figure out how to put it all together.
Yeah.
God doesn't put exact things in scripture for no random purpose. He's very precise. That was so awesome.
God is a God of order. Exactly. I agree with you, Melissa.
Yeah. Well, these are things that no one's else observed before. No one's ever talked about this. No one's ever written about this. Because we're observing the word of God. We're observing the book of Revelation. We're measuring the temple. We're seeing the things from the temple, how they pray, what days they pray, all the furnishing. That's why we're seeing this. because we're doing what Jesus told us. And the book of Revelation says, there's a blessing, not those just that hear the revelation, but who keep it, who observe it. And there's one place where we're given instruction, which is to measure the tabernacle and to digest the book so that those things prepare us for that last calling. So these are things that, people say, oh, we know it all, we've studied it all, we don't need any more study. The well is, we're only taking a sip from the well. We can present every week, dig deeper and deeper and deeper into the meaning of all these things, but they all come back to something very simple. Jesus, like he did with both the Jews and the Gentiles, he wants the disciples to feed them. You feed them. Like, well, and what do you think these guys felt when Jesus had died and been resurrected? They went back to fishing. They go, well, we got to make a living for us. We don't have any provisions. We got to make a living for ourselves. He said, no, no, no. Remember the fish. I'll give you the provisions, and what I give you, you share with others. But there's going to be so much left over from what I provide you. So when we have in our last days, gee, I don't know if I should join the ministry because I don't have the provision, or what happens if I change my ways and I begin to believe in Jesus, and I lose my job, or I lose my school professorship, or whatever. And he's saying here, don't worry, follow me, I will provide. There'll be lots left over. So call people out of every nation, out of every tongue, and it'll happen because of a broadcast ministry like this. It won't just be going out in one language into one thing. It'll quickly translate into those, 12 or 17 languages and go around the world quickly because it's been set up that way. Now we have this internet, we have these ways to minister. I was talking earlier today about, what this church might do or that might do. Well, if you have a building and you had a church that you had to worry about, and they've been built with ties, or but there's another, this ministry just has a broadcast ministry. It's pretty hard to shut down from a church, from the church point of view. And so when we focus on the things that I mean, I'm not saying this because of me. I'm saying this because it's the truth. We're seeing those things and we're talking about those things that nobody has ever talked about ever in any broadcast, any book. Some of the numbers I just showed you today, the 16 times 1.5525 times 2. How could you get more specific than that? And you can't. But those are the truth. Those are the measurements of the temple. Those are the days of redemption. Those are the law. Those are the prophets. It's absolutely, to me, amazing and it's when Jesus gives us this to digest, and we fully digested it, then we're compelled to share it with others. And it's those sort of things that people that have never heard, or maybe they've just been slack in their understanding, when they hear those sort of things, it makes their heart burn, just like it did the two disciples on the way on the road when Jesus appeared to them and began to teach them from the book of Moses all the way how all these things were supposed to happen. And their hearts burned when they realized, really who he was, and how this was all meant to be and all supposed to be. And next week, what we're going to find out is where we sit in history, and what we're supposed to do, and where we are right now, and the blessing that we're at, but also how short the time is. It's the last call, the very last call. And that's why, I'm proud to be part of this ministry, because, we're just going for it. We're just not holding back and just speaking. We're reading, we're observing, we're sharing everything we have, sharing right away. Sharing. Like I said, it's not even written or broadcast anymore. So anyway, I'll shut up so people can ask a couple questions or make some comments if you want.
Anybody have anything to say? Probably on YouTube where they can't, but
Yeah. Okay, well, next week is going to be part 3 and that'll be the last part of it. But we're going to talk really about these numbers again, but really we're going to talk more about the prophetic numbers and the tabernacle and the holy days leading up to our time and in our time. And by that time, we should have a pretty good understanding of the whole what the Lord is teaching us in this 153 fish and the 17, the number 17 and 153.
Very good. No comments, anybody? Maybe they're not there. I see you, John. You have anything to say?
All right. Well,
It's a little overwhelming, Brent.
Yeah.
it's
It
supposed
is.
to be.
I was
Because
You
it's,
wondering what
don't have to
happened to
remember it
John's
all.
other half.
It's just to remember it as he's speaking it. It makes sense. It's like, yep, all those things connect, and it's just
that's why
he didn't come up with it out of the thin air. It's there. God has given him the brain power to put those numbers to on paper.
it's why it's why we want to get the satellite going here in North America, and also why I want to get the book out over this next month to complete everything, because then you got it in front of you, you can study it, you use it, you can use your own math, whatever. And that's so that book is really for everybody. Some of the things we're talking about right now are really more for the believers, because they've already seen in that book or whatever. And that's where the excitement lies, is that we can study each week and find out more and see things more. And that's what the Lord wants us to be able to do. Because then when we're out evangelizing or whatever, you can answer so many questions, the 1,260 days, all these sort of different things, because you'll see they all tie into these numbers the more we get going. The From Angela to all analysts. I don't know what that means.
Oh, sorry.
Well, it makes you very, very encouraged too to go out and speak, because even though you can't repeat everything you've said, what you've said has convinced me. I need to be convinced, but it's even more convincing. The Bible is real. He is coming soon. We better be ready. And some people just, take little bits and pieces from the Bible, and it's like, don't twist it, don't change it.
Yeah.
It says what it says, and you better believe it. He meant it, and he did it for a reason. And time is coming in, and I want other people to be ready. I hope I am, but it's encouraging and exciting to me, because I really think he's coming soon. And I'm just sitting there thinking, oh, what is it going to be like in heaven? How beautiful, how fun, how nice, how just everything. It's just, and it's ours. It's ours to take. You just have to believe and understand and share it, bring others in, just know it's real.
The good thing is that, like, you learn by repetition and by looking at things in different angles, different ways, and so
Right.
it's not a one-trick pony. Where, I mean, when we're talking next week, we're going to be talking more about a circle and dividing that up and seeing how things work, and so as you what you're going to see all the time, though, it's between the 6th and the 7th, and it's the reconciliation of those two numbers. And we're going to be able to plot out a 7-day week and a 7-year Sabbath cycle with those exact same numbers. And so as you see things like that, and you don't know why, okay, where was the fourth day? Where are we right now? So it's all the same. It's you know um uh 28 times or divided by 7,777 is 3.6, which is 6 times 6. But divided by 4 is 7. So 4 times 7 is 28. But 28 divided by 3.6 is 7,777. So there's things that we're going to see about 6 and 7 and about why they're given in a certain way. And but they all point to the Lord. They point, and the thing is, oh, Jesus, when he spoke of Adam, he spoke of Moses, he spoke of Noah, Enoch, King David, and he glorified all of those people amongst himself. And that's the thing from the beginning, is that when he called David, or he called Noah, Noah followed the exact pattern, or like he wanted them to, he called them to do what they were called to do, and they'll be in that cloud of glory. And he calls us in this generation, and he wants us to see that we actually are in the last generation of the last apostles call. You're disciples when you're a student, but when you actually go out, you're an apostle. You're an exact representative. So we're not qualified to be apostles until we're really, well-learned disciples. But we can go out and actually represent 100% the truth, no deviation, not having to make up stuff or bend or twist things or whatever. And the only way to do that is to stick with the Bible and to understand it. And there's so many people now that are so bored, and they're just regurgitating, like they take all the Ellen White stuff from the 100 years ago, and they never knew it before. It took 10 years to study it all and learn it all. Now they think, okay, I know it all, so now I don't need to know anything else. And that's where the danger sets in. It's like Lucifer didn't, he thought he knew it all and stopped going to God. So there's that last church, the Laodicean church, you know, Jesus said, I can spew you out of my mouth because it's so lukewarm. But, he says, buy thyself from me, buy your robes from me. Right now, everything that we are studying are things that we get the blessing of being able to talk about stuff like this. Some other ministry could come along and right now take exactly everything I said today, copy it all, put it out there, and say, we beat them to the punch. We got a much bigger ministry. More people are going to see it. But you know what they don't know? They don't know the next chapter, because we're the ones studying it chapter by chapter. So we can talk about something next week altogether different that they won't get, because they're not observing what we're observing in the way that we're observing it. So it never, the cup never runs, and it's like when Jesus said, well, the disciples were talking about, the sort of the competition between the disciples who were baptizing, and Jesus said, if they're not against us, they're for us. So I don't even care if someone copies that and gets it, because that just means more people are going to hear it. So we don't have any competition. We're not. It's not an ego thing. It's not a. We just want to do it right. Have the book out, have the salad out, get it out there, because the more people that talk about it and understand it, the better. The more people that, and you never know what you're going to say that some person has wondered about their whole time. Like Melissa commented about, I knew there was something to the 153 fish. Well, now she knows there's more to it, and even the 276. It was interesting about Paul, and it's the 276 people he talked about. Well, what was the year of the flood we just saw? 27.6, 1656. And Paul talked about there's 276 people on this boat. It's just amazing how they all tie together. There's nothing random. It's just certain things. And, we'll understand. The good thing about 666, about 0.666 is times 1.5 is 1. Or 6,666 times 1.5 is 10. So there's a reason why the arc is 1.5 times 2.5 times 1.5, because that takes the 666 and turns it into 1 or 10. Remember the boards are 10 high. So there's a reason certain things happen in judgment, and there's a reason why Jesus at a certain time, cause these events happen. So all these things matter. Every fourth dimension, every uh, dimension of the ark, all the things were given to observe, the covering, the boards, everything. And to me, it's incredible to see that all these things were given by Jesus. He's the one that gave the pattern up in the mountain. The Lord gave the pattern to Moses and then fulfilled it. But he's the one that had Moses, in the burning bush and led them out of Egypt. And Pharaoh wouldn't let him go, and so this is how these days. I mean, he chose the days. He chose exactly what day the ark was going to come to a rest. He chose all the days, and he said, "Observe this, observe this." So he makes it happen on the same day for a reason, so that we see it again and again and again and go, okay, this is from the Lord, and this is about salvation, this is about redemption, this is about judgment. If the donkey, won't, if you won't redeem the donkey is too stubborn, then it perishes, and that's the same thing in the last call. If someone can see all this and is too stubborn to admit that this book is from God, and they're too stubborn to accept that free sacrifice, that willing sacrifice, they're going to perish. And that's not because it's because of the stubbornness, because they're going to keep persecuting
Stubborn
Christians.
pride.
Yeah, they're going to, and they would keep persecuting Christians in heaven because it's just in their heart. It's become hardened. And so they only respond one of two ways to the gospel when it's spoken in truth. Either it melts your heart and it humbles you, and you, like Peter, say, I'm not worthy, but that's what Christ wants you to know first, is that he is Lord and God, not some good man or prophet, that he's the Lord God. And then he wants, he calls you by the recognition of the supernatural being. And then, once he calls you, then it's in such grace and such provision, for you and stuff. And he, in that love, and then he makes you go out and call others, because out of your desire to do it, not out of being forced to do it. But others, it hardens their heart. I have a sister, hardens her heart to hear it, and she'll do anything to avoid a conversation. If I'm speaking to my mom or whatever, it's like she'll distract, anything, just to not hear the word of God. And one day I hope to reach her, but can't help it if someone he gives you one or two responses. So anyway, and the last call will be the same thing. There'll be time of trouble for sure, but there'll be people coming out of everywhere, going to just going to the side of the Lord and being saved, you know, and that great harvest is the end time. I noticed something even on Heinz slide about the number of churches and different things that really caught my eye. We might have talk about it sometime, but anyway, the numbers are all important. All that numbers do is express things you observe, and that's why pi is so important, because it expresses what we observe in nature. I mean, you can't describe the movement of the planets. You can't describe light. You can't describe sound without using the pi in the formula. And pi is dependent on that same ratio, the 17 and the 153. It's amazing. It's amazing. So,
Yep, I agree. Thank you very much.
well,
And
thank you
thank
all.
you, Hein, for all your info.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I guys, I've sent Sandy a copy of my notes. It's 80 pages, by the way, of notes that I have on that thing. If anybody's interested, I can send it to you if you want to just drop me an email or whatever, or ask Sandy. I've sent it to her. Yeah, no, it's Brent. Once again, I just sit in awe. I just really am just in awe. I tell you what, at the next GC session in heaven, okay, we'll go put up your stall there and I'll run it for you. How's that for a deal?
Yeah.
Sounds good.
I just sent you my email.
Okay, okay, I'll quickly do that. But thank you very much once again, folks. It's so nice to see you again. And
Thank you,
yeah,
everybody. Thank you. And it's, I'm sure getting lunchtime for most people, so I'm going to sign off and see you, Keith and Hein, and